To the weight of the scope. The morning mist clings to the frozen fields outside Holtzwihr, France, as Staff Sergeant Audie Murphy adjusts the scope on his M1 Garand with deliberate precision. His breath forms small clouds in the bitter January air of 1945, each exhale measured and controlled despite the chaos erupting around his position. The 15th Regiment has been holding this sector for 3 days, but German forces are pressing hard through the Colmar pocket, and Murphy can see the dark shapes of enemy infantry moving through the tree line 600 yards away. Private Rodriguez crouches beside him, feeding range estimates through chattering teeth. 650 yards to that machine gun nest, Sarge. Winds coming from the northeast, maybe 8 miles per hour. Murphy nods, settling into his shooting position against the low stone wall that runs along what used to be someone's farm. The scoped Garand feels different in his hands than the standard rifle most soldiers carry. He'd requested the modification weeks earlier, understanding that in situations like this, precision often matters more than volume of fire. The tactical situation deteriorates by the minute. Radio contact with battalion headquarters cuts in and out due to damaged equipment, and the promised artillery support hasn't materialized. Behind them, 2 miles down the frozen road, lies a field hospital where dozens of wounded American soldiers wait for evacuation. If Murphy's depleted squad withdraws now, the Germans will have a clear avenue to those helpless men. Through his scope, Murphy watches the German machine gun team adjust their position. The lead gunner appears no older than 19, methodically feeding ammunition belts while scanning for targets. Murphy steadies his breathing, fighting down the familiar knot of fear that precedes moments like this. His hands remain perfectly steady despite the cold and adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Murphy, Lieutenant Collins wants you on the radio," Rodriguez whispers, pointing toward their makeshift command post behind a burned-out farmhouse. But Murphy doesn't move from his position. Something in the enemy's movement pattern tells him the attack will come soon, and when it does, his squad will need every advantage they can get. The scope brings everything into sharp focus, not just the German positions, but the weight of the decision pressing down on his shoulders. The first shot takes the machine gunner cleanly, dropping him without drama. Murphy works the bolt smoothly, acquiring his next target before the Germans understand what happened. The second shot eliminates the assistant gunner as he tries to take over the weapon. Suddenly, the entire enemy advance loses its primary fire support. But this success creates a new problem. Now every enemy soldier in the area knows exactly where Murphy is positioned, and they begin concentrating their fire on his section of stone wall. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. The return fire intensifies as German infantry realizes their machine gun crew is down. Bullets chip away at Murphy's stone wall cover while he continues working methodically through his ammunition, each shot carefully aimed at specific threats. The scope becomes his window into a deadly chess game where every decision requires split-second calculation. "Jesus, Murphy, they're zeroing in on us!" Private Coleman shouts from a shell crater 20 yards to the left. "We need to pull back." Lieutenant Collins finally reaches their position, crawling through the snow with the radio handset pressed to his ear. His face bears the strain of a young officer trying to process conflicting orders from battalion while watching his men take casualties. "Regiment says to hold until 1600 hours, Collins calls out over the gunfire. "They're sending armor support, but it won't arrive for another 2 hours. Murphy doesn't respond immediately. Through his scope, he's identified 3 more machine gun positions, and what appears to be a German squad leader coordinating flanking movements through the frozen drainage ditches. The mathematics of the situation become clear. His 9 remaining men cannot hold this ground against a reinforced company for 2 hours using conventional tactics. The Vosges Mountains terrain works both for and against them. The rolling hills provide concealment for German movement, but the elevated position gives Murphy's rifle exceptional fields of fire. Snow muffles sound, making it difficult to track enemy movement by ear, yet it also reveals footprints and disturbed vegetation that betrays approach routes. Rodriguez slides closer, his ammunition bandolier nearly empty. "Sarge, I count at least 40 krauts moving up through those trees. Maybe more we can't see." The scoped rifle speaks again, and a German non-com directing the flanking movement pitches forward into the snow. Murphy shifts aim quickly, disrupting the coordination of the advance. But for every target he eliminates, 2 more appear to take its place. "Collins, what's the word from 2nd Platoon?" Murphy asks without taking his eye from the scope. "Lost contact 20 minutes ago," the lieutenant admits. "Could be equipment failure, could be worse." The implication hangs in the frigid air. If 2nd Platoon's position collapsed, Murphy's squad now represents the only organized resistance between the German advance and the field hospital. The weight of responsibility settles across his shoulders like the heavy winter overcoat that never quite keeps the cold away. Private Kowalski, the squad's automatic rifleman, calls out from behind a pile of frozen logs. "Ammo's running low, Murphy. Maybe 30 rounds for the bar." Through the scope, Murphy watches German soldiers testing approaches from multiple directions. They're learning his rhythm, timing their movements to minimize exposure. Professional soldiers adapting to the threat he represents. The German probe intensifies as enemy infantry begins coordinating their movements more effectively. Murphy realizes they've identified him as the primary threat and are developing specific tactics to neutralize his position. Every few minutes, concentrated fire forces him away from the scope while German soldiers advance under cover of the barrage. "They're getting smarter about this," Sergeant Baker observes from his position near the farmhouse ruins. He's been with Murphy since Sicily, long enough to read the tactical situation developing around them. Pretty soon they'll have us bracketed from 3 sides. Lieutenant Collins crouches behind the stone wall, studying his map with the focused intensity of a young officer trying to find solutions that don't exist on paper. The radio crackles intermittently with fragments of communication from other units across the Colmar pocket, most of it bad news about German counterattacks and American positions under pressure. Murphy's scope finds another target, a German sergeant directing mortar teams into position. The shot drops the man, but Murphy knows the mortars will continue firing. Once they find the range to his position, the stone wall will provide little protection against high explosive shells dropping from above. "Murphy," Rodriguez whispers urgently. "I see movement in that barn, maybe 200 yards northwest. Looks like they're setting up something heavy." The scope swings to the indicated position, revealing glimpses of German soldiers maneuvering what appears to be an anti-tank gun. If they get that weapon operational, it will make Murphy's position untenable. But the range is extreme for rifle fire, and the targets appear only briefly in the shadows of the barn's interior. Private Coleman slides through the snow toward their position, his face grim with news from the squad's left flank. "Kowalski's hit," he reports. "Took shrapnel from a grenade. He can still fight, but that automatic rifle's about done for. The tactical mathematics become increasingly impossible." 9 men, now reduced to 8 effectives, holding a position against company-strength German forces with armor support somewhere behind the enemy infantry. The promised American reinforcements remain 2 hours away, assuming they arrive at all. Yet Murphy finds himself thinking not about withdrawal, but about the wounded soldiers in that field hospital. Men from other units, other fights, who trusted that someone would hold the line between them and the enemy. The scope brings German faces into sharp focus, young soldiers following orders, probably as frightened as his own men. "Collins, can you raise regiment again?" Murphy asks. "I need to know if there's anyone else between here and that medical station." The lieutenant works the radio handset, static filling the air between broken transmissions. Finally, he shakes his head. "Negative. We're it, Murphy. Battalion says hold at all costs." The weight of those words settles over the entire squad. In military terminology, hold at all costs carries a specific meaning that every soldier understands. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The German assault begins in earnest just after noon, preceded by a brief mortar barrage that forces Murphy's squad deep into whatever cover they can find. When the shells stop falling, enemy infantry advances from 3 directions simultaneously, using the smoke and debris to mask their approach until they're within 100 yards of the American position. Murphy returns to his scope as the first German soldiers break from the tree line. The modified Garand speaks with mechanical precision, each shot carefully placed to disrupt the enemy's coordination. But there are too many targets moving too fast for even perfect marksmanship to stop them all. "They're through the wire on the left," Sergeant Baker shouts, swinging his rifle toward German soldiers who've penetrated the squad's hasty perimeter. The fight becomes a confusion of close-range gunfire, shouted orders, and the sharp crack of grenades exploding in the frozen ground. Murphy finds himself switching between scope work at longer ranges and point shooting at Germans who've closed to within 50 yards of his position. Rodriguez feeds him ammunition and range estimates while simultaneously working his own rifle. More coming through that draw, maybe a full squad. The stone wall that provided such excellent cover for precision shooting becomes a trap as German forces begin to surround it. Murphy realizes that staying in position much longer will result in the complete destruction of his squad. Yet every minute they hold gives the field hospital more time to evacuate the wounded. Lieutenant Collins appears at Murphy's shoulder, his face streaked with cordite and sweat despite the freezing temperature. "Murphy, we need to fall back to secondary positions. This is getting overrun." But Murphy doesn't move from behind the scope. Through the magnified optic, he can see German officers directing the assault, pointing toward weaknesses in the American line. If he can eliminate the leadership, the attack might lose coordination long enough for his men to disengage safely. The scope finds a German captain gesturing toward flanking routes. The shot drops him cleanly, causing immediate confusion among the soldiers he'd been directing. Murphy shifts aim, finding a sergeant attempting to reorganize the same group. Another shot, another disruption in enemy coordination. But the mathematical reality remains unchanged. 8 American soldiers cannot hold against company-strength forces indefinitely. Murphy begins calculating not how to win, but how to buy maximum time while preserving as many of his men as possible. The scoped rifle continues its methodical work, each shot placed with the precision of a craftsman rather than the desperation of a man facing overwhelming odds. German soldiers begin to recognize the pattern of accurate fire and adjust their tactics accordingly, but Murphy adapts faster than they can learn. Private Kowalski, despite his wounds, maintains fire with the damaged automatic rifle until the weapon finally jams completely. "That's it for the bar," he calls out. As the German assault reaches its peak, Murphy makes a decision that will haunt him for decades. Rather than ordering the withdrawal that tactical doctrine demands, he tells his men to fall back to secondary positions while he remains behind the scope, buying time with his own life as collateral. "Murphy, what the hell are you doing?" Lieutenant Collins demands as he realizes Murphy isn't moving with the rest of the squad. "Get them back to the farmhouse," Murphy replies without lifting his eye from the scope. "I can hold them here longer than all of us can hold them there." The truth behind what becomes legend lies in this moment. Murphy's decision stems not from fearless heroism, but from cold mathematical certainty that 9 men will die if they stay, while 1 man might survive long enough to matter. The scope reveals German forces massing for what will obviously be the final assault against the stone wall position. Rodriguez hesitates, torn between orders and loyalty. "Sarge, you can't." "Go," Murphy cuts him off. "That's an order." What the citation will never capture is the weight of absolute solitude, as Murphy watches his men withdraw to better defensive positions. The scoped rifle becomes his only companion in a tactical situation that any reasonable analysis would call suicide. German soldiers close from multiple directions, their movements coordinated by leaders who finally solve the puzzle of his position. The scope brings enemy faces into intimate focus. A young German private, probably 18, advancing through the snow with the mechanical determination of someone following orders. A grizzled sergeant, old enough to be Murphy's father, directing machine gun fire. Human beings doing their jobs in a war that reduces everything to simple mathematics of survival. Murphy's shots become more selective as ammunition dwindles. Each bullet must count not just for tactical effect, but for the additional seconds it might purchase. The German advance slows as casualties mount, but it doesn't stop. Professional soldiers adapting to the reality of one American rifleman who refuses to retreat. The secret that will never appear in official reports. Murphy's hands shake constantly now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that follows extended combat. The scope wavers slightly with each shot, requiring conscious effort to maintain the precision that's kept him alive this long. German return fire intensifies as enemy soldiers realize their target has been isolated from supporting troops. Bullets fragment against the stone wall, sending chips of masonry spinning through the air. Murphy tastes blood from where stone splinters have cut his face, but the scope remains steady. Through the magnified optic, he watches a German lieutenant organize what appears to be the final assault. 20 soldiers, maybe more, positioning themselves for a coordinated rush that will overwhelm his position through sheer numbers. The mathematics become clear. Murphy has perhaps 30 rounds remaining, and even perfect shooting cannot stop 20 determined men across open ground. The final German assault never comes. As enemy soldiers position themselves for the coordinated rush, American armor finally arrives. 2 Sherman tanks and a half-track loaded with fresh infantry from Baker Company. The German forces, caught in the open by sudden armored support, begin a fighting withdrawal toward the tree line. Murphy remains behind his scope, watching German soldiers disappear into the Vosges Mountains forest from which they'd emerged hours earlier. His hands tremble now with exhaustion rather than adrenaline, and the modified Garand feels impossibly heavy across his knees. Lieutenant Collins approaches cautiously, as if uncertain whether Murphy has emerged intact from whatever place a man goes when he decides to die for time. "You okay, Sergeant?" Murphy doesn't answer immediately. Through the scope, he can still see the faces of the German soldiers he'd killed, young men who'd been following orders just as he'd been following his own understanding of duty. The mathematics of the afternoon resolve into a simple equation. American wounded, evacuated safely, his squad intact, enemy advance delayed. Rodriguez and the others return from their secondary positions, moving with the careful restraint of men who've witnessed something they lack words to describe. Sergeant Baker organizes ammunition redistribution and casualty reports with quiet efficiency, but keeps glancing toward Murphy with an expression that mixes respect and something approaching concern. The after-action report, written 3 hours later in the relative warmth of a battalion command post, will reduce the afternoon to clean sentences about defensive positions successfully held and enemy forces repelled. Lieutenant Collins struggles with the official language, trying to capture in military terminology what cannot be captured, the decision to stay behind when every tactical manual demands withdrawal. Private Rodriguez, years later, will attempt to explain to his children what he saw that afternoon near Holzwehr. He'll talk about courage and duty and the price of keeping faith with wounded soldiers in a field hospital. But he'll never mention the weight of watching a friend calculate his own death as the cost of buying time for others. Murphy himself discovers that survival creates its own burden. The scoped rifle, cleaned and maintained with the same methodical precision he showed during the firefight, becomes a symbol of something he cannot articulate. Not heroism exactly, but the terrible clarity that comes from accepting mathematical certainties that other men cannot face. Decades later, the smell of cordite or the sight of winter mist will bring Murphy back to that stone wall outside Holtzwihr. Not the legend that appears in citations and newspaper articles, but the memory of faces seen through a rifle scope, and the knowledge that courage sometimes means staying alone while better men seek safety. The official commendation speaks of extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty. It mentions tactical success and enemy casualties and the protection of friendly medical facilities, but it cannot capture the weight that settles into a man's bones when he discovers he's capable of calculating death, his own and others, with perfect coldness when the mathematics demand it. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.